City Council's back from recess, and we are looking at AB 18088, Public Safety Update, with Assistant City Manager Tori Brazidas.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor and members of the City Council. So again, welcome back. Part 3. I'm just going to cover some background as to what led us up to our conversation this evening, and then some specific items we'd be looking for your direction on this evening. So as you may recall, in April and May, the Council has also been studying this in depth, along with earlier study of this issue, both in past budget cycles and formal guidance to staff to examine some options in October. So what we'll be doing this evening, after your guidance in April, generally on some priorities that we had heard from the Council, we then turned that into some draft proposals in May, got further feedback, and moved some items around in there. Going to show you how that's been updated for your meeting this evening and consideration. Then we'll talk a little bit about so that's what led us to today. So we'll have some draft proposals for your review. We do have draft ballot language, so you can see what it would look like if you were to choose to send something, not at this meeting, but if you were to choose to send something potentially at your next meeting, you'll see what it would look like on the ballot. You'll see that for a potential public safety operations levy lid lift, a potential public safety capital bond. Then there will also be a further discussion on the duration, and then discussion for next steps. The big items that we're looking for direction on this evening are the items in the levy lid lift, if you feel that is reflective of your priorities and that of the community. So the what in the potential levy lid lift is what we're looking for some feedback on. We're also looking for your thoughts on the duration of a potential levy lid lift, are the two big ones. Will also be the public input summary is a final report of the listening period that we did on your behalf from March through the end of May. So this is a summary report. At this point, as we get comments from members of the public, we'll be sending those on to you directly, so that we're not continuing to gather it. We'll be taking note of it. But as you consider any sort of potential decisions, we want to connect residents with thoughts on policy matters to you directly. So you'll see the themes. Before we get into the public safety input summary, I wanted just to go over some of the changes that we made after your feedback at the last meeting. The important one is that we had left off, I think, at 53 or 54 cents per thousand. We got it down to 43 thanks to some magic in finance, but perfectly legitimate magic. One of them is that in 2019, finance changed all the salary totals to be 9 months worth of salary, knowing that we can't have everybody start on January 1st. So that is a more realistic estimate of what the cost would look like in 2019, knowing it would take at least 3 months to hire any staff person. 3 months is unrealistically short for hiring police officers. So it would likely be even more of a ramp up time than that, but we wanted to be conservative in our estimates. So they just shortened it by 3 months for every position. The other item is that we heard Council's priority for supporting patrol operations and making sure those are very robust in the city. That had in a previous iteration been a package of 4 patrol officers. That has actually changed into items 3 through 6 right there. And this was a way, after some further reflection and discussion with police command staff, that we are proposing back to you that we could get the same improved support of patrol operations in a little more nuanced way. So this tailoring is, instead of 4 patrol officers, one of them is a detective. So that is for the cases that patrol will generate, so someone to help with the investigation side. A traffic officer, in a reflection of the priority that we had heard from you and also from the community on traffic enforcement. A community engagement coordinator, in reflection of what we had heard from you about making sure the police are well connected with the community and have good relationships. And then a police support officer is a non-commissioned position that does a lot of tasks that would otherwise fall to patrol officers on overtime. Particularly court transportation is an issue of need right now. So if there isn't enough support in the police support officer position, and that has to go to overtime, that's much more expensive. So we were proposing to support patrol with those 4 positions instead of the 4 patrol officers directly. So there was a lot of thought and discussion on that, but just wanted to flag that for you. That's a change since last time. The other two are item number 10. You had asked for some ideas for continuing support fire operations. And so in that we have 3 additional firefighters with the block of money that council had directed us to work with. Also within that, you'll notice there's 1 vehicle. There's not usually vehicles in fire lines for something like this, but that's actually an additional aid car. So that was a way of getting 3 additional firefighters and an aid car into the levy. The last item is I just want you to know that we have been making sure that the numbers are really good for the final line, capital bond estimated M&O impact. We had some questions on making sure that those were very solid. I'm proud to report that Public Works Facilities make some excellent spreadsheets. And so that impact, the full impact of that is really felt in 2021. So that has a very low impact the first 2 years, and then it gets higher if the fire stations were constructed, because that's when the full impact on facilities is felt. So in order to get an even number, we sent it over the staff recommended 12 years of what we're recommending for consideration for a potential levy lid lift. So it evens out the number so you don't have nothing in the first 2 years and then a giant ramp up in years 3 through 12. We just equalize it over the 12. So those are all the factors that went into this revised proposal at 43 cents per thousand, or $213 a year at your direction. So I just wanted to cover that before we get into the public input, because you'll see some of that reflected, and also in your comments that we talked about earlier. So I'll revisit this again later. So when we review the potential draft ballot language, we'll see this chart again. I just wanted to give you a preview and some of the rationale behind that revised proposal before we get started. Questions for me before I hand it over to...
Anyone have questions, comments? I just want to say I really appreciate the work that has been done, because I know when we ended our last discussion, we were at 54 cents, and council made it pretty clear that it shouldn't exceed 50, and so it's fabulous. It's down to 43 cents, and the thing that I want the public to hear is that is the highest it will ever be, because as the city grows, everyone's portion goes down. So that's the highest it'll ever be. Thanks.
Sure thing. And with that, I would like to introduce Chris Fawcett, partner at Cocker Fennessy, to present the summary report of our listening that we've done for you. It'll explain all the different activities and themes that they've heard throughout. Thank you.
Thank you, Tori. Hi, Deputy Mayor. Hello, council members. Thanks for having me back. As Tori mentioned, I want to just take a few minutes. I don't want to take a ton of time. I think some of this was in your packet prior, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at it, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But I wanted to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about the listening that we did after we completed the stakeholder interviews. So you'll recall that we did some of those in April with some of your community leaders. And then on the heels of that, we did some different activities to try and get more input from your residents. So I'm going to go through the types of tools that we use, the types of questions that were asked, and then some of the things that we heard. Okay. So starting off, we did hear very clearly from your staff about the need to do some robust engagement as you were considering the current needs and challenges that you have with your public safety services, so that that would help you as you weighed solutions. So some of the goals were really to try and gain feedback from the residents, but also to try and introduce information and try and educate a little bit. I think we heard a lot in the stakeholder interviews that people are very happy with your public safety services, but maybe didn't have as much information because they were so happy they just kind of moved along in their day. So some of the work we did was really to try and get information to share with you and compile for you, but also to try and educate and introduce this as an issue. And whether you choose to move forward with ballot measures or not, it's really important, I think, that the community understand what the services they are receiving, what the challenges are. So here are some of the tools that we used over the last couple of months. And I'd like to just recognize Barbara did a really great job. She oversaw most of these and implemented a lot of them. And it was quite a bit over a short amount of time. So we tried to focus on existing channels instead of trying to recreate new ones. So go to places where people are online, utilize your already existing tools that you have for the city that people are used to hearing from, utilizing community partners that you have developed, partnerships you've had, so that when people received information, they were hearing it from folks that they trust and are used to getting information from. So we have on there the stakeholder interviews. This summary does not really include those themes, but I will mention that they are very, very similar, which is nice that there's some consistency. We used centrally a web page, a public safety web page that's on the city's website as sort of the repository for information, resources. There was an FAQ on there. These presentations were put on there. There was a video developed that was trying to encourage people to drive them to this website. So that was kind of our hub for the information. There was also an online survey, so people could provide feedback with some key questions, which is what we'll run through. And also an opportunity to sign up for a listserv. So if they wanted to get regular updates, they could, and that's something that you could utilize into the future depending on what direction you go. We did also, I should mention that there was a presence at the Main Street event. Obviously, these council meetings have been an opportunity to provide information. And as city staff has been out and about in some of their daily activities, they've been mentioning this effort and trying to drive people to the website to get more information. Lastly, utilizing your city e-newsletter. There were a couple of articles that were included in that. And then the Bothell Bridge as well. There were 3 articles that were focused around public safety, so pretty good opportunities. I did skip, I'm sorry, I should mention, obviously social media and traditional media were utilized. There was an article in the Bothell Reporter and then an op-ed that also the call to action was to try and get people to go to the website and provide feedback. So I think hopefully all those things were making some awareness around this issue that you guys are looking into. Okay, so some of the questions, particularly like based on the online survey, you are in front of you, and they're consistent with the types of questions that we talked about with the community leaders during the stakeholder interviews. And really a lot of that was trying to understand what people thought were the most pressing needs, what are most concerning to them. Talking a little bit about what they think about the current services, police, fire, EMS, and the municipal court services. And then sort of asking when it comes to those services, what are they things that they think that the city does particularly well? What are some of the things that they think the city could do better? And with the online piece, most of these had the opportunity for open-ended. So we got a range of responses. People sort of stayed within the boundaries, but they also shared, you know, a lot of different things. So you'll see that in some of the themes. Okay, so let's get into some of them. I will say that, so I'm going to go through some of the high-level themes that we heard across the platforms, and then a couple of the additional findings that we still heard significantly from a number of folks. I will say with a caveat, this is people that chose to get online and respond. So it's not scientifically generalizable to the full-on population of Bothell. It's not like we did a survey of 800 people and could say that this is something that you could generalize across your full population. But I will note that there were definitely themes that were very consistent to what we heard from the discussions with community leaders as well. So that's just a little caveat. And maybe some of the things that you've heard, I know a lot of you have been having discussions with your constituents. So the good news, there is absolutely good positive general support for public safety. People value the services. They think they're important. They want them to be supported. There is still, and we heard this in the stakeholder interviews, strong support for the services, but not a whole lot of real detailed awareness about specific services or challenges. So that's something that as you move forward, regardless of whether you go to the ballot or not, I think is probably important so that people understand the services. Reminder that up here, the italicized comments are actual quotes. So those are the words that the respondents used. Again, not surprisingly, there's not a lot of familiarity or knowledge about your municipal court services. I think people, unless they use them directly, it's sort of out of sight, out of mind for them. Kind of on the heels of that, there's a lot of really strong satisfaction with the current level of public safety services. So people feel safe for the most part. They're comfortable with the services. They're happy with the services that they receive. They think response times are positive and good, and they like their public service providers. So that's really consistent with what we heard before. Being comfortable and happy with the services is a good thing. They did also note, though, that there's an understanding and a recognition that with the population growth and the changes in your city, that there could be more future support needed. So we heard some really specific comments about getting in front of issues that they start to see happening, and we'll go through some of the top of mind issues, but trying to address some of those things before they become a problem. So even though they recognize that they're getting good response times, they're getting good services, fire and police, they do recognize that there might be a time when there will be more challenges. So that, I think that's good to see, because that was a concern that we had in the stakeholder interviews where people did not see as much of a need. Again, I don't want to overstate, but I think it's important because across these platforms there were so many positive comments about the service providers that I think it's important to know that. I think that's a bit unusual in a jurisdiction as well. And so I think it's important to know that there's that strong connection and trust and confidence with these services and the service providers. Not only were and these comments illustrate it fairly well, not only are they happy with the amount of response, the level of response, but the way that the services are being provided. There's some nice terms in there about kind of humanistic approach, professionalism. Those are all very positive things. So we did, again, not surprisingly, and probably on the heels of the previous presentation about some of the transportation improvements, the growth in the traffic, the amount of traffic, the increase in traffic is like front and center in the residents' mind. And they view that as public safety because of the things that come along with it: speeding, pedestrian safety, people driving irritated, running red lights, is in their minds a pressing public safety issue. So I think being able to know that connection of, and with Tori's presentation of what is sort of drafted in the package, people are looking for more presence, I think, particularly on the police side, to make sure that there is some enforcement around some of those traffic issues. You know, sidewalks came up again. People sort of clump that all into one batch, I think. But those were top of mind. But then there were some of these other things that come along with, I think, some of your population growth and change in the city in terms of theft, petty crimes, car break-ins, increased drug activity. Those were also things that people raised as top concerns for them. Oh, I should mention too that, and not surprisingly, with all the national attention, school safety was a pressing issue as well, consistent again with, I think, the stakeholder interviews. So those were some of the high-level themes, again, very consistent. I'm going to just go through a couple of additional findings because I think it hopefully will be helpful as you're thinking about the packages and if you want to move forward. So they're consistent with what I said before. I think that there is a desire for a little more presence, particularly from police. And I'm saying a lot of, because I think we were focused around some of those issues that they raised in terms of petty crime and drug and some increased homelessness. Fire wasn't as focused upon in some of these comments, but I don't think that's at all reflective of what people prioritize, because when we asked about rating fire services, it was very high, and the value that people placed on fire was very high. I just think that it might not be quite as front and center as their face on a daily basis. So you may see a little more around police here, but I don't think that's reflective of a lack of prioritization. And we had some, you saw some of the comments about responses, particularly including the EMS responses. People, when they were rating services, mentioned how they'd all had incidences or knew of people that had really quick response around EMS and how that was important. So additional staff is desired. Homelessness wasn't raised as much as we heard through the stakeholder interviews, but it was mentioned. And it was mentioned again as a problem that there was concern that if you don't get in front of it, it could become a bigger problem. And you can see from some of these comments, which are definitely reflective, there's some pretty strong feelings about getting on top of it and not letting it get out of hand. There is a connection to people really did often mention homelessness in connection with increased drug activity and the opioid epidemic. You'll see in one of the slides there was a lot of talk about Seattle, and I think people really raised they don't want to turn into Seattle. We did hear, I mentioned population growth, but also development was raised. And interestingly, and you'll hear a little bit more about city finances, but I think that doing some education around where funding sources come from and how funds go to things would be a little bit helpful. There were a number of comments of people saying, can't there be a connection between developers' fees and ensuring that these public safety services are robust? Not surprisingly, efficiencies are desired. So ensuring that residents understand how you're wisely using their tax dollars is important. And there were some specific comments and suggestions about collaborations with other jurisdictions, which I know you do already, but trying to be creative around that. And we did have a few folks raise how active and engaged this community is, and is there a way to use citizen volunteers to help with some of the activities. So it was definitely something that came up. This is the point about Seattle. Clearly, folks feel that Bothell is changing from a smaller community and turning into a bigger city with more people coming in, and they really want to be cognizant of and thoughtful about how the city grows and ensuring that their first responders and this important service is getting the support it needs. I think it's interesting, we didn't hear a lot on these platforms about other jurisdictions maybe that are of similar size or on the east side close, but we did hear that quite a bit in the stakeholder interviews. So clearly people make connections and do comparisons with some of your kind of same size cities, and certainly Seattle stands out as an area that is dealing with a lot of social issues that they would not like to see happen here, come into this community. Again, not surprisingly, throughout this, I don't think there were any real huge ahas, but there were mixed comments. We did ask people if it had an open-ended, like, what else would you like to share about public safety and or about potential ballot measures? And there was a huge range of folks, some very supportive to move forward and happy to pay additional funds for these resources. Others that were not interested at all, or certainly thought that there should be enough money to support these services. One thing we heard is sort of affordability. Again, not surprising, people have rising concerns about property tax values, property taxes, and so there is some concern that there can be some tax fatigue. But it was really all over the map in terms of measures. And I would just end, I think, with that there is an open-mindedness to understand, because there is this support for these important basic services that you provide. People do want to understand if there are challenges. They're happy with the services, but they're open-minded to hear what the future holds and how they can be a part of that solution. So just a couple of thoughts based on some of that, and we talked a bit about this throughout this, and certainly with the stakeholder interview presentation. But I think it'll be important moving forward, regardless of ballot measures or not, to tell that really full story about your public safety services and what people get, how they're funded, what are priorities, what are future challenges. I think connecting those impacts and benefits that the residents receive is critical, and how that actually also helps those public servants provide better services to them. Because affordability is front and center for folks, I think that the safety issue is important and the benefits that you get from that are, but also if there are messages around how addressing these challenges now will save money down the line is really an important story to tell. Hearing people talk about efficiencies, I think they'd be open to that message. And then clearly some discussion about how this population growth doesn't necessarily pay for itself in terms of the services. And I know Tammy has done some thinking around that, but we did hear a lot of that, like, well, we're getting more growth. Doesn't that just automatically kind of one for one pay for it? So those finances, in a way that's easy to digest, succinct, would be important for your residents to hear. So those are kind of the big things, but I'm happy to take any questions now, and I will also be around, so if you want to hold that for further discussion.
You have questions up here. Councilmember Zorns?
It's a real short question. I asked this of our city manager yesterday, and I know social media is buzzing about ways that the city can improve how it spends money on things, and I asked her about this question of, because you listed it, outsourcing 911, and it was an excellent answer, and the people at Bothell might appreciate hearing why we don't want maybe outsourcing our 911 services. Is probably best left as it is. So could someone speak to that?
Not I, but somebody else I bet could.
Carol, I don't know if the chief might be able to weigh in on, they've done some pretty comprehensive analyses in the past on that. It is a really large project to take that on, but if you could just speak briefly on our dispatch communication center operations. The question had been that some of the residents had suggested, why didn't we look at outsourcing that? I think the short answer would be that we had, but I'll let the chief speak to that.
Yes, when I came to the city as the chief, that was one of the questions. It was during the recession, and we were really looking for any efficiencies, and so they did a deep dive into it. In fact, even had a project manager take this on, because it is extremely complicated. And the ultimate result was that, from what we could tell at that time, the savings would be minimal, if any. There are reasons to have your own dispatch center. There are reasons to have it outsourced. You have to make your decisions based on that. But I actually spoke to one chief who had made a switch, and for a number of reasons, and he said the cost was flat. In fact, he said it might have even cost a little bit more at that time. And again, this is probably 5-6 years ago, so it's a little bit dated. But we have looked into it. If, the council wanted to have us do that again, we could, but be advised, it's very, very complicated, and it's a very large project to do. So.
Can I just add one little follow-up question, is that my assumption is that keeping 911 local helps the dispatcher who's familiar with the area be able to better communicate to the police officers what's going on, where things are happening.
I think that is absolutely true. You develop a relationship between the dispatcher and the officer. For example, in our department, the dispatchers regularly will go on ride-alongs with the officer to be able to visually see the areas that they're getting the calls on, and also to get to know the officers so that when they hear them on the radio and a certain tone of voice, you get to know whether or not something is serious or not. So yes, you're absolutely correct in that. That's one of the strong advantages.
Councilmember McAuliffe.
Yes, thank you. I was very impressed with the work you've done to kind of get the public input. And, both positive and, those that have concerns. I think one of the themes I've heard, which I think is really important for the public to think about, and they do, is taking proactive steps. As we look around at other communities and we see the opium crisis and homelessness and the drugs that come in, we know that if we can be proactive, we can prevent these things from really happening, and I think that's critical when you talk about the need for safety and addressing those issues. Also, I think it's important to think about the question that I kept hearing a little bit was, we have a lot of development going on, and how do the developers contribute to the infrastructure and to the safety services? So I don't expect you to answer that, but I think it's a theme we have to think about.
Sure.
And then the fact that a lot of people are not familiar with the challenges that we face at the levels for police and fire and the courts. So education piece is really important here. This comes out pretty strong.
Yep.
And then, again, the concern of senior citizens. We've done, the school levies. We've done the transit, sound transit, and now again, another hit. We did sidewalks. So senior citizens trying to stay in their homes is still, I can still hear their voice.
Absolutely. You're right on.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I just have a comment, which is it's a real quandary when you hear everyone's happy, they're doing a great job, because we know how stressed our public service personnel is, and yet it makes me incredibly proud that the public doesn't know how stressed they are. And so that speaks to their professionalism. I really admire them. I just wanted to briefly ask the chief, when we look at the main themes that came out, neighborhood policing, traffic theft, drugs, parking, bike and pedestrian safety, school safety, proactive policing, are there any gaps in this potential levy from what you see with what we're currently looking at for new personnel? Are we covering those bases from your perspective? I mean, I know parking is one that's not on the list, that probably wouldn't be covered by this additional personnel, but are there any other gaps? In other words, will we see more neighborhood policing? Will we see more kind of traffic presence? Do you understand where I'm going?
Yes, I do. And I think, well, you hit the main one, which is parking. That wasn't addressed. But when we we really tried to balance this, to not have, we could have a Taj Mahal, and this is not a Taj Mahal, but I think it hits the core issues that we're really struggling with right now. And a lot of that has to do with that proactive work that we feel is not, that we're not being as effective with. And it's the proactive work that prevents the crime from happening. And so when we went back at the most recent, the last changes that we made, that was really doing a deeper dive into specific areas that we really need to have addressed. So for example, another traffic officer was one, and then the other was looking at the types of crime that we figured that the proactive team would be addressing, and some of that residual will then increase the workload of our detective unit, and that's why we made that modification to add that detective instead of another officer. So we really, I think it's a really good plan, and I think it provides a very, very solid foundation and control with some additional assistance to that division.
Yeah, I think that 11 cents is, that's quite a huge reduction in where we were the last time we had this conversation. So I really feel, I really feel that you've worked hard to get that number down, to really go for what we need and not the Taj Mahal. So I appreciate that. I did want to ask, when it comes to citizen volunteers, what does that look like, and what might it cost? And is it something that you think would be beneficial?
Well, I think any time that you get citizens involved in their government, it's very beneficial. And who knows their neighborhood the best than the people that live there? We simply do not have the capacity at this time to be able to effectively manage a volunteer program. And so with part of that, the community engagement person, one of those tasks, well, one of the primary one is in communication and, the social media aspect and the outreach to the community. But then the other part of that work would be coming up with programs that have value for the city. And I would really be looking in part to the council for some direction on that, because again, you can't do everything. You have to decide where do you want to put your time. So one thing that had been suggested would be community citizen volunteer program. Other things that have been mentioned would be citizens academies. Many departments have those. So to really, if should we get that position to come back and say, these are the things that we think have value, and have that conversation about where we should put our focus. And sometimes it's a matter of getting the program started, and then you will have more capacity to get something else started. So you can get some that are self-sustaining.
I would love to see a Citizens Academy and more participation from the community, because I think, I know from my experience being on a board, I just learned that government is complex and it's not easy, and there aren't easy answers, and you get more of an appreciation when you are up a little bit closer to it, and instead of looking in from the outside. The other thing that I wondered is, would it be possible, I know you've given us charts and we've looked at how the needs have grown and the crime statistics over I can't remember how many years, and I just wondered, is that on the website? Is that available to citizens for them to see? And would it be possible to put it on there, because it seems like it's something that they're asking for?
I would just answer, I know that one of the first presentations that assistant, I'm going to call you the wrong thing, city manager, put with the presentation that she gave you at one of the first sessions had some of those charts. So they are in there, they are in a presentation, so you would have to go through that. But one of the things that we would obviously do if you move forward is really shift to a mode where there is really good, clear, compelling graphs and data and facts that I think we'd want to try and circulate and put out there in a good way. So there is some, but we'd want to be sort of particular, think about which ones we use in terms of just, you're only going to have so much attention for folks, but they're very compelling. I agree.
Yeah, I think so as well.
Yeah.
And I know I'm very visual, and
Yeah.
that stuff really speaks to me
Yeah.
very quickly instead of reading through droves and droves of
Exactly.
information. So,
Yeah.
and then I have one last question for Director Shackman. And this is in regards to, we have a fire impact fee. And I think you weren't there the last time I asked the question. It seems from my memory that the fire impact fee was, could be used for additional equipment that would be required for building the capacity of the fire department. And so my question is, I don't know how much money that fire impact fee is actually bringing in, but could it be used for the new additional aid car?
You know, I looked that up and I knew that answer at one time. The one thing that I will say, I will look it up again, it's like a 800,000 or something like that. I'll look it up and get back to you. But I will say that using the monies for equipment, there are some entities that do that. I can think of one in particular. But you're pushing the envelope by doing that. And fire impact fees are the most litigated of any impact fee. So I'm not saying you can't do it, but I think it would need to be looked at very, very carefully before we went down that road.
So currently, the fire impact fees that we collect, and I understand it has to kind of be in there as part of the formula in order to collect the money, but we are collecting fire impact fees right now currently. So
Correct.
what would you say they're going toward? The bulk of those monies, or have they? Are we collecting them in order to get enough to actually do anything with it?
Actual facilities. So something that actually expanded the capacity of the building that they're operating out of.
So if we're talking about a bond for 2 fire stations, a portion of those 2 fire stations could be paid for with the fire impact fee.
Correct.
Do we have to update the fire impact fee, or would we have to change the formula to include those in what we currently charge for the fire impact fee?
Yes, you would have to look at the new facilities and have a new fire impact fee study done or an update to include the more expensive buildings, facilities, if they're bigger and are serving more people or a greater area or something like that.
So process-wise, how does that work when we're talking about putting a bond together and potentially voting on that bond in June? There's not enough time to do that. So how would that work?
You wouldn't be able to actually update the fire impact fee until after those buildings are in place, so that you could include that capacity within that study. It's the same with the parks. Once the parks are purchased that the community is looking at, then there would be an update to the park impact fee so that those new parks could be included in the methodology.
So is that kind of like we had to put Wayne on the capital facilities plan in order to be able to spend money on it, or collect use park impact fees for it?
Yes.
Thank you. I should know this, but I just wanted to make sure that I understood. Thanks so much.
Councilmember Agnew.
Yes, this is for the chief. We brought up dispatch. Maybe it's time again to look at that. I'm not sure if there's a lag time between when the time police gets the call to dispatching it to NORCOM and then it going to fire. And I'd like to know if there is a lag time, but we should probably take a look at that dispatch to see if we want to continue on with that dispatch since it was brought up. I did have another question for the police chief, and that was on the traffic officer. It was $186,000, $213,000 on the next year. And it seems like they're paid the same as a detective. Is that correct?
There's specialty pays, so just off the top of my head, as soon as you said that, I'm thinking, okay, it's this percentage. Between the two, I'd have to get back with you on what the specific specialty pay is, but it's close.
I'm happy to, oh, sorry. I would actually.
Oh. They are paid the same. The first year shows 9 months, and the second year shows 12.
Oh, okay, thank you. And then fire impact fees. We are going to be putting on an aid car. That is an addition that was brought on by the population growth. So I'm not sure why we couldn't be using the fire impact fees to at least purchase that aid car.
There is at least one city that I know of that does this and includes it in their methodology. But again, legal should probably look at that and make a determination whether or not the more people who do it, the more it's going to be looked at, and then sooner or later, it probably would be litigated. So we would just have to decide if we were willing to go that route.
Thank you.
So thanks for doing the public, collecting public comment on this. I think it's really helpful for us to get that information. We can't do it all by ourselves. One of the things that we recently did, and I think other council members, I think all of us are signed up to do a police ride-along. I did that. I was on a full moon intentionally, and I got to tell you, if people want to see why we need more police officers, can anybody do a ride-along, Chief?
We have some capacity issues, so it's a little challenging, but depending on the circumstances, we can occasionally have people do ride-alongs.
Okay, so I guess I'd throw it out there too, that if anybody would want me to take them to, I saw basically where our local heroin addicts hang out. And now I know how to identify which ones are the heroin addicts, and I'll go meet you in QFC's parking lot, and I bet within an hour we'll meet one of our local heroin addicts. And not that we want to meet them, but I'll just point them out to you, and so you can understand, like, that's what we're dealing with. But we have 4 officers on patrol per shift. Well, actually, it's supposed to be 5 with the sergeant.
4 is our minimum staffing.
Okay. Well, the night I was there was 4 and a sergeant, and we just drove around all the hotels, and we drove around all the grocery stores, and then one of them had an issue, one of the heroin addicts got worked up, and these are the same people that are homeless, stealing, and doing heroin. They're the same people. And it was interesting to see, because there is an actual relationship the city has with these people. And I didn't know that until I did it. But I mean, that's a really expensive relationship. And it also makes it so if you count up the square footage of all the hotels and the grocery store parking lots where we're spending the majority of our time on patrol, the whole rest of the city is not being patrolled. And that's the thing that really kind of stuck out in my head, is like, wow, I guess it'd be all right if you lived next door to a hotel that has a bunch of heroin addicts hanging out in the parking lot, because then you would at least, the police would be right by your house. But the rest of the city is not basically being patrolled, because it's not a priority, and when you have these things happening in public places. So I'll throw it out there. I'm willing to take people to go see this. I think I've been talking about it since I did it to every single elected official. Like, you just got to go see this. And people are like, oh, that doesn't happen in my town. And I was in Kirkland, and I said I was at your QFC last night with my kid. And after you cruise a parking lot with the police officers, you know what to look for. And by the time I came out with my kid, there's 4 cops having to deal with a heroin addict. It's just up on Finn Hill by St. Edward's Park. So, not to be doom and gloom, but the problem with heroin, homelessness, and stealing is a very complex issue. And if we don't start trying to address it, I mean, what we're doing now is we're just trying to keep the fires out, and we need to get on top of it, or else we will become like another Seattle. So, that's kind of my perspective from doing a ride-along. And I support making sure we have increases, so we start doing some proactive policing. Not that we aren't now, but having more police officers to do that, I think, is going to be a huge gain for us into the future. Because a lot of cities aren't doing that at all. They think there's no problem. So On that happy note, is there anybody else that would want to provide public comment, or not public comment, but comment or questions? All right, everybody's. I came into this midstream, so I don't know where we were in the process of the. Oh, you've got more. Oh,
So the last.
sorry, I thought we were done. I was about to motion to adjourn. Oh, did we extend before I got here? No. Is there a motion to extend?
We did not. Answer your question.
Moved by Councilor McNeil to extend to 9:30.
Second.
Seconded by Deputy Mayor. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, press vote. There it goes. Passes 6-1 with Councilmember Agnew being annoying. You have the floor, Tori.
Thank you. So if it pleases the council, the last two items are just to review with you exactly, again, what would be, as per your direction, in a potential levy lid lift for public safety. We're going to go over the what, so what items are in it, and then the how is the duration question. There's types and duration of levies, and we have some recommendations. And for that, I will turn to Tammy and Alice. I'll start with the what, and then we'll move on to that part. And then we'll also just review what is in the potential capital bond for the 2 new fire stations, and review that language as well. So it's really just seeing those 2 items and getting your thoughts on it. If those look all right, staff would request some form of direction to continue development of this and bring it back. But we wanted to show you what generally it would look like. And that's all I have left.
All right, is there any discussion on that? I thought you said you had 2 things left. Just that one?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
if we start with the levy lid lift, I had mentioned this a little bit earlier, some of the changes we made to meet the council's direction to bring it down below 49 cents per thousand, so we're at 43. As I'd mentioned, the 2019 total does include the 9 months of salary, and then we had switched out the 4 patrol officers for the more tailoring of 4 individual positions that we felt would help support patrol in the way that you were intending. Checked over the capital bond estimated M&O impact for some really solid numbers there, so we feel really good about that. And then the additional firefighters in the aid car there. So that was some of the changes from your last direction, and much more information is available in the packet as to what those different pieces would mean. So the feedback we would be looking from you on this would be if this looks like the correct what. If you were interested in something. And then the meatier discussion for tonight that's newer would be in what way you would want to see that presented. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different types and duration options. And then the next slide is a mock-up of what that language would look like. So.
You have a question, Councilmember McAuliffe?
I just want to be sure, because I have some questions about some of the, what's proposed here for the public safety levy lid, and should it be now, or should I wait until further presentation?
I think now is fine if it's on the top of your head.
Sure.
I just went on a diatribe for no reason, apparently. I thought we were done, so.
No, I was,
Go for it.
okay, here, I was focusing on the presentation that talked about public opinion, and I saved this for, my questions for you, Tori.
That sounds great.
So, my question is this. On number 5, if I was to, if we put in the police support officers, and does that help us to eliminate overtime?
I will look to the chief.
It could. The patrol support officers are the ones that do the transportation of the prisoners, and if we don't have a patrol support officer, we then have to utilize an officer, which means we are either taking one from the street, from their patrol district. If we are below minimum, then we have to call an officer in to do this on overtime. So it depends on there's not a clear answer, but it is a less expensive way of doing this job than using a fully trained police officer, and certainly less expensive if we're having to call somebody in on overtime.
Thank you. And then I have another one, and that is on the school outreach and safety officers. Do we know, is this middle schools and elementary? Do we have some, I know that further information is coming, but I wondered at this time, do we know where those officers will, who they'll serve, who they will serve?
So this is an innovative program, and we don't have a record of being able to look back in other agencies that have been doing this. The thought would be it would be open to all schools for specific students, so that clearly more of the issues we find in high schools and middle schools, but should there be a child acting out in a grade school, the thought process would we'd be working with them too, because it's kind of a system of care, that it's not just the officer, but it's also bringing in the support services of, the navigator and the counselors and, appropriate services.
So as the need presents itself.
Correct.
Thank you. And then, let's see, this is for, regarding the aid car. Today, if we have a need to have an aid car and then there's a second call, are there other engines or other vehicles that go out? And would we be saving dollars by having a second aid car? And also quicker response?
Well, yes, we do have backup aid cars and engines. With the staffing is the issue. Typically, for 2 of our stations, we have 3 people assigned, so if they go on a call, there's no more people to staff anything, so it doesn't matter if you have an aid car there or not. Station 42, the downtown station, we have 3 companies, a medic unit, an aid car, and an engine that can go out, so they have the ability to take multiple cars, multiple calls out of there. Part of this, the aid cars, to try to get an aid car back in our vehicle reserve fleet. We have some, I don't want to get too far, but we have some other issues with not being able to support replacement of current aid cars based on how we purchased them in the past. And this is going to this will take care of that problem going forward.
Thank you. And I think there's just 2 more, if I may. I'm looking at the public safety application analyst and knowing that both for fire, which is number 12, and for number 6, it kind of looks to me like, could we possibly do some sharing of the social media person instead of having one in the fire department and then the other one over here in number 6, which would be community engagement police and that outreach? Could we combine that a little bit?
Sure. I'm happy to speak generally on those 2 positions, although I see Director Sherman's here. So I know the community engagement coordinator is more about the use of communications technology. So it's using social media platforms to communicate about the police department. And my understanding of the application analyst is they would serve a little different role, but.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So the engagement position would be working in the police department to work with the community, where the application analyst would be focusing on the software that's needed for both fire and police. Right now, fire is not getting the support it needs for the multiple systems that we have and migration from older systems to newer systems. Some of this public safety application analyst would also support the evidence technician and software needs that's presented here. So when we talk about an application analyst, we usually talk about it as an FTE. So it's a percentage of how much work they would be doing in both the public safety realms.
Thank you. And my final question, and you might want to get back to me on this because I'm not really sure about the capital bond M&O impact, number 13. And I think that's, if I'm correct, it's to serve the new stations on maintenance. Is that correct?
It covers a variety of things. If I don't know if Director Lenhart would like to elaborate. I know it does include higher insurance costs for a higher building replacement value was one of the big ones I had noticed, and increased facilities staffing and support, and a vehicle to also meet the needs there. But I
think that covers a lot of it. With the new buildings, there will be new systems that will be more sophisticated, so it adds costs associated with all of the operations of the new facilities, and as Assistant City Manager mentioned, the increased insurance rates that would be necessary.
Thank you. And I guess I'm struggling a little bit with the fact that we have 2 new stations kind of in the levy or the capital facilities, and I would wonder if, could I ask the fire chief if you had a priority on one station, which one that would be?
Okay, I'm going to be professional and give you a direct answer, but first I'm going to whine about that question because it's like, which baby do you want to give up? That's really hard. I mean, both stations are in need of replacement for different reasons, but like I said, I'll give you a direct answer. If I had to pick, which I don't want to, but if I had to, probably because the station that's probably the most out of modern fire station building standards, the one that's probably the hardest to get back up, just because it doesn't have private dorms, sleeping dorms. It's got really poor cross-contamination issues, hot, warm zones that are really be hard to resolve through remodel. It's the station that we probably would be increasing staffing the soonest in, the immediate need for that. And it's also a station we could potentially get a police reporting room in for a satellite station, which I know they're looking for. That'd be Station 45 on the list, if I had to.
And is there any way, I'm just not going to ask you to answer this right now, but I would like to consider, if we did choose one, could there be some renovation for the second one instead of a whole new building? But we can talk about that later.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, carry on.
Great. So this is the how. So that's the potential what would be included, but the how is the types and the duration questions on how that would be presented. So with that, I will turn it over.
Okay. Well, the levy lid lift can either be a single year or multi-year. A single year literally means that it can only increase above the 1% limit for one single year, while a multi-year can increase by a inflator, 5% CPIW, a figure like that, for up to 6 years. And then they also, both a single and a multi-year levy lid lift can be temporary or they can be permanent. Temporary means that when you meet either the first year of a single levy lid lift, it reverts back to as if it never happened. So you just go back to what it would have been if you had taken the 1% maximum. If it's a permanent, it doesn't revert back. It takes that highest level of levy and then moves forward from there 1% per year after the end of the period. Now you can also have a multi-year that is 6 years with an inflator, and also you can have as many years as you want after that that maintain that level but only increase at 1%, the statutory limit, for years after 6. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever. It would move forward in that direction. So those are really the choices about how we would move forward if council chooses to do this. Some of the considerations are the fact that these monies are M&O type monies and therefore have to do with staffing. So it would be very difficult to get officers to come from another agency or choose Bothell over another entity if it was a single year levy lid lift. So a person would most likely want to see a minimum of 6 years and more if possible before they would want to change agencies. Do you have any questions about those? I have Alice here, and she is the city's bond counsel, and she worked on multiple bond issues with the city, and including the 6320 for this building. So she's very knowledgeable and is here to answer any questions that you have about levy lid lifts or bond measures.
And I guess I would add, I first worked with Bothell over 15 years ago in creating the urban EMS district. Oh. So this brings it full circle to come back to public safety.
So I have a question. Oh, there we go, Councilmember Agnew.
So the numbers that we see right now, what is the estimated time of the levy?
It could be in the AB, there was an assumption of a multi-year with a 5% inflator over a 6-year period, and then goes back to just 1% for the following 6. So it's a 12-year levy, multi-year levy. But the numbers that you're seeing, they could be, you could put them out there in either. It could be multi-year, it could be single year, but again, if you did a single year, you would have difficulty hiring staff.
I don't know if it would be helpful at this point, but we do have a slide here that shows a mock-up of what this levy lid lift proposition might look like, and we can kind of walk through what that would be. Just one down, there we go. So this again is a sample, and we can continue to work on what this would look like. But it basically, anytime you're doing a ballot proposition for a levy lid lift, there are certain things that are required by statute to be in that. And so we've hit this, and we've tried to capture what we think, what the staff recommendation is at this point. So it describes that this would be a proposition for a levy lid lift for an increase, and it describes the purposes, which we've been talking about up till now, and adding public safety officers and professionals, and then related expenses, and trying to capture in a very succinct way kind of some of the topics and some of the areas that those professionals and safety officers would cover. And then talking about the specifics of how the levy would work. Statute requires that this ballot proposition is going to show to voters what the city's total levy rate would be. And so that includes the city's current $1.62. That's the 2018 rate. Plus, and it includes the Safe Streets and Sidewalks levy lid lift as well. And then shows in parentheses there the 43-cent increase that would be as a result of this. And the 43-cent, the amount that is generated by that 43 cents is the amount we'd be talking about dedicating to these public safety purposes. Yeah, and so then the next part of this talks about, as Tammy was mentioning, the next sort of decision point is, do you want to build in an inflator over those 6 years to be able to sort of ramp up and keep the amount of dollars that you can generate with your levy growing sort of in pace with the costs as staff are recruited, trained, hired, brought fully on board, and as this program ramps up, and then also considering that public safety employee costs will continue to rise over time along with their personnel, your collective bargaining agreements, et cetera. And so this proposal here would suggest that over that first 6-year period, the city would increase the cap by an inflator. This one uses inflation measured by CPI. You are free to choose a different number, like a flat percentage or something else, but the CPI inflator seemed to make sense to some of the staff in terms of, again, keeping pace with those inflation costs on the personnel cost side. Finally, this ballot measure would describe how at the end of that 6-year period, rather than sort of falling off a cliff, the city would use an additional 6-year period in this example to kind of carry that level of funding forward, use that as a check-in point to come back and say, are we still providing the things that the public here wants? Do we want to start planning for our next proposal in order to keep the funding going for the next period of time. And so that gives the city some planning time to check in and say, are we still going in the right direction? Check in with the public, and then to propose to the public what the next package looks like. Because again, with public safety and bringing these officers on board, I think staff was approaching this as a way to provide a stable funding source going forward. But it will require those regular check-in times back with the public to ensure that they will still continue to approve dedicating this money to those purposes. The way this particular sample is written, at the end of the 12-year period, it would drop off that cliff unless the public reapproved additional funding. And so this does have sort of a sunset and sort of a built-in check-in to kind of come back to your residents and your constituents. So that's kind of the summary of the staff proposal and this sample ballot proposition. But again, I've highlighted some of the issues that can be discussed.
The deputy city manager is going to add a few words as well.
Sorry, I just wanted to go back to the last slide. So it can be a little confusing, the single or temporary. So if you want to think about safe streets and sidewalks, that was a temporary. So temporary means there's an end, and for operations, that means there's a cliff at the end, but it does build in that time frame and the re-asking the voters and having the conversation. So if you start with that question, that's the first thing to think about. Temporary is there's a time limit of a certain number of years. Permanent means it continues. So Kirkland's recent streets and parks levies were permanent. Our safe streets and sidewalks was temporary. So that's an easy way to answer that first question. The single year or multi-year is whether or not there's an inflator above 1% for the first 6 years. So if it's a single year, that's a safe streets and sidewalks. So that one doesn't have an inflator of some above 1% on it. So that was a temporary single year levy lead lift for safe streets and sidewalks. So if that's helpful, it can be a little confusing with temporary and single year, but that first line is about whether or not the levy goes up by 1% every year or a different number for the first 6. The second line is whether or not it has an end date with that cliff or if it goes on for longer, if that's helpful. And I drew this on a whiteboard earlier and I don't have a whiteboard here. So happy to answer any questions on that, but the terminology can be a little confusing.
It's super confusing. Is there a motion to extend the meeting, Mr. Agnew, Councilmember Agnew, by any chance?
I'd like to extend the meeting till 10:15.
I'll second that. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, place your vote. Well, that passed unanimously. So, yeah, not that you're not explaining it correctly. I'm sure it's just how we'd like to do ballots for some reason. And I'm struggling with the single year or multi-year. So temporary permanent, I got that. I think we're all okay on the temporary permanent. Am I the one that's just suffering over here? So the single year is just, you just say it's just one. Can you explain it maybe one more time so I can try to get through my head?
Yeah, and Alice did a nice job. I'm happy to give any layman explanation as to what I interpreted, but we'll start with her.
We can interpret it. It's back and forth. I like a visual as well, but so I'll use my hands. So your normal levy goes up like this. Just call that the 1% increase, normal every year, right? A safe streets and sidewalks style 1 year levy lift, instead of going like this, then you would have a little bump like this, but you still keep going up at that same angle, that same 1%. Okay, so what the multi-year does is it says you can take that bump in that 1 year, and then you can go up at a little steeper angle for a couple of years, and then you're back at your 1%. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So, you know, that sort of 101%, that's, you know, every year you levy, you know, $100,000, and the next year it's $101,000, and then $102,000. You know, it's not exactly, but the math doesn't work exactly like that. But that's the sort of 1% incline that the maximum amount that you can levy increases at. And what you're talking about is, instead of going up at that same steady rate, taking a shorter period to move to a higher point. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
Can I try one more thing?
Yeah.
A single year, you can go up at any inflator you want the first year, and then it's 1% from there on out.
I got
For a
that.
multi-year, you can go out 6 years at whatever inflator you want, and it can be different every year. So you could go up, you could put it the same as public safety officers' step increases and their CPIW increase. So you could say 5% per year for 6 years. So you've just went up like this versus like this. Versus the 1%. And then after 6 years, that's all that you can go above the 1% without going out to the voters again.
Okay.
Okay? So at that point, you're at 1% for however many more years you want to go out.
So it's not 47 cents per thousand assessed value then?
Yeah,
In
actually,
year two?
it would be diluted over the capacity or the AV, because AV is going to continue to increase.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would say like the 43%, it would probably stay right in that range.
Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, I just add that depending on how fast assessed values increase, you know, sometimes it actually will go down even though you've had a levy lid lift in place. So the rate is difficult beyond 1 year. It's sort of difficult to look into a crystal ball and say what that rate might be.
I'm sure the public totally gets all this, you guys. No worries. All right, Deputy Mayor.
She drew something.
I have an additional question. I really think I get this. But my other question is, I was under the impression that like the 43 cents that now we're talking about would go down because as you have more building stock, you're diluting that. But is that the case? Because I guess with a capital bond, you have a fixed number that you're per year collecting, and so it gets diluted with additional growth. But if we're talking the levy lid lift where it's going up 5%, that's probably not applicable to the 43 cent.
It would have a different effect, but over the 6 years, then it would go back down, just like the bond issue for the public safety building across the street. It started out, you know, I don't know, 20-some cents or 30-some cents, and it ended up down at 10 cents per thousand at the end.
Well, and I get that with capital. I guess I don't understand with the levy lid lift, because it's basically, there's not a fixed number overall. It's a percentage of, right? That's what's confusing to me.
The inflator is what changes it. If it stays at 1%, I can guarantee you it will go down as long as we're seeing double-digit increases in our AV. Okay, so we're seeing double-digit increases in our AV. As long as that continues, I would expect even a 5% increase to probably be diluted over time.
But if you're a person who owns a home that's worth $500,000, you're not going to pay less because your house value is going up. Right? I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, is if my house is worth $500,000 and the first year I'm paying 43 cents, if it goes up 10% the following year and there's an additional 5%, like what am I actually paying?
Except that when you look at, first of all, I do want to add that there is a hyperlink in the agenda bill that anybody can go online, hit the hyperlink, and you'll be taken out to MRSC, and they have great graphs that explain all of this. So if a person is visual rather than auditory, the pictures are there for you to see the diagrams and that. And then as far as the 43 cents, if 43 cents continues to, if your property is 500,000 and it goes up to 600,000. Okay, that 43 cents is definitely going to be diluted. I mean, that's a huge increase. But the increase, we're not increasing it 43 cents more for every 1,000. It's just 43 cents for what it was at the time. Does that make sense? There's also a dollar value associated with that 43 cents.
Nope, lost me.
Let's try Alice. We'll give it another shot, a different angle. Okay, so there's 2 points I want to get at here. One, I think to try a different kind of illustration from what Tammy was just talking about. On your house, if 43 cents translates to $200. And we have an inflator that allows, and assuming your house increases in value at the same rate as the rest of the city, then the first year you pay $200. The next year, if we use a 5% inflator, you will be paying $210. So yes, with the 5% inflator, you would be going up 5% more than you paid the year before. So yes, that's how that is built. The question from the policy level is, if finance were able to put together over the 6-year period, and let's just focus on those first 6 years, the amount of money, the total aggregate amount of money that the city would need to provide these services over that entire 6-year period. One way to do it would be to work backwards and average it out, allocate it out so that you collected 1/6 in every year. That would produce a higher number initially, but then you could go up by just the 1% over time. And so you would, it would kind of average it all out and sort of tip the scale, so you had a little bit of a flatter increase. The proposal that's here would instead have the revenues coming into the city on a schedule that kind of matches the ramping up of the program. And so rather than having it go up by more in the first year and then relatively flat going out, it goes up by a smaller amount in the first year and increases as those costs increase to the city. Does that help?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just trying to figure out that what happens to the 43 cents.
Yeah.
Because there's two factors, right?
Yeah.
There's the 5% factor, and then there's the AV factor. And I'm trying to figure out combined what the net is.
And you'll drive yourself in circles, I mean,
Right.
because of the crystal ball factor of not knowing how assessed values will go. And so levy rates are very difficult to predict into the next year. You just don't know how the whole city's assessed value will change within that time period.
Can I ask another question? And that is, currently, I think our range is 15 cents per dollar collected actually comes to City of Bothell. Do we know how much of that dollar would be coming to City of Bothell with these changes?
I don't, because I don't know what everybody else is doing out there right now. I will say in the last 18 years here, it always runs 16-18% of property tax comes to the city. So I would guess that we would be in the same range when you look at the school districts and what they're asking for, and you know, the SD3s.
So our percentage is roughly going to stay the same. So of every dollar people spend, we get between 16 and 18 cents for property tax.
Relatively what it's been for the last 18 years that I've seen, yeah, because we put that dollar together for everybody to see every year, and it's always has been in that range,
Yeah, I just wondered if it would impact it, so that's good information.
Yeah, it'll depend on who else goes out and asks for increases.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you. I think most of my stuff was just actually answered in that last little round robin there. So if you have a $500,000 house, $200 this year could go up to $205, $210, whatever, over the next few years, right? If the assessed value, if we tank, if our economy goes south and our property values go down immensely, what happens?
That's the teeter-totter of property taxes in this state. So, and we saw this in 2008, with major crashes like that. What happens is your rate goes up. The amount, like we've been talking about, the amount collected tries to stay constant, but the rate goes up. It can tip so far, and this happened in 2008 in many places, where you start hitting the statutory rate limitations. And so at some point, there could become a tipping point where you couldn't collect as much as the voters had approved. But where your levy is currently is not likely ever to kind of hit that point. Tammy wanted to make sure. But I mean, your levy relative to those rate limitations is quite low at this point. And so that would have to be a very, very drastic situation.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm ready to weigh in now that you, just so you guys know, the part where you said this is the policy direction. So this is my opinion. So I don't want it to be a large increase now. there's a lot of different things that have happened, like SD3 and the school levy, and so people are just kind of, well, not just the school levy, but the actual state allocation of taxes for public schools is just now hitting us. And so to go have something, a large hit to the public right now, I want to avoid that. So I hope that helps. And then, so a 6-year with the inflator and then having a 12-year levy seems to sound right to me. This isn't a temporary thing. This is a permanent issue. I don't know about going out for a full-on permanent. I don't know if we have any stats on that, like how likely are you to pass a permanent levy, but that just doesn't sound like something the public wants us to come out and ask them for money. And so that's, I have some pause about doing a permanent levy. Does that help? Did that help? Did I communicate that? Okay, great. Anybody else want to weigh in on what they prefer? Councilmember Olson.
Yeah, very similar to the mayor. The temporary, I think, just echoing that we get buy-in after a while and just have that option also gives us the flexibility if the economy does change or just the environment changes, so we can modify it. One question I had was in the example that you put up for the example language, you were tying it to the CPI. What's kind of the average that's?
Right now it's running about 2%.
Okay. Does it fluctuate or what's the variability on that? Because that may be one thing that we just put in a fixed number in that range, so it's a known number and not just this kind of unknown.
Yeah, if you look
acronym.
back at the last 20, 30 years even, you'll see, I think the highest was 6.5 cents or 6.5% and 6.2%. That happened one year. The rest of it normally, I mean, the feds try to keep it between, 1 and 2.5%. They work at making it happen. So it would take something pretty drastic to change that as well. So, but again, CPIW is not going to keep up with the cost of staffing. I mean, that's just an inherent problem that we have. But again, like the mayor said, we can use new construction sales tax or those type of things to cover some of those costs.
And just to clarify, your suggestion, your direction there was to see if you could put a number into that ballot title so people would, yeah, and we can play around with something that would do that. The problem is that we're really limited to the number of words, and right now we're at the limit.
Yeah.
But it definitely is something that can work into an explanatory statement that also appears in the voter's pamphlet, and we can work and see if there's a way to fit it in here.
Yeah, I just think having that acronym in there instead of a defined number is just another variable for, opponents or even people that are unsure of it, just to go scratch their head and say, yeah, I don't like that. That's too black box for me. I don't want to go for that. And then just one other thing that with these date ranges and everything, it always, I don't know, spins in my head. If it could be just, I know you were saying that you're running out of words already, but just saying 2020 to 2024 and, saying the 6-year, just the date, the actual number of years instead of having to, because you look at it, okay, from 2018 to 2024, it's kind of hidden in there that it's a 6-year bump, because you see the 4 years and then you have to do 19 and then, so just a suggestion on that one. Thank you.
Who'd like to go next? Councilmember McAuliffe.
So let me just try and clarify. So I think when you talk about a multi-year with a 5% for 6 years, that's not permanent? Because you talked about then going back to the public. So that's temporary, correct?
That would be, right, that would be temporary because
Right.
there'd be sort of a cliff at the end of that.
Right. And so you would have to go back to the voters then and ask them for the next 6 years, correct?
You would in that scenario, yes.
So I guess I have a little concern about that because I'm thinking 6 years is not a very long time.
So the sample we put up here would actually make it would extend for another 6 years, and then it would expire, right?
Oh, okay.
So it's still temporary, but it's a little bit different flavor of the temporary.
Okay, so in reality, it's 12 years?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Ragney.
Temporary, multi-year?
Oh, wow, that was impressive. Yeah. Councilmember McNeil.
I tend to agree, making sure that we don't have a large impact right now. I think that would be very burdensome, have a huge impact on a lot of folks in our community. I'm in agreement with the temporary, and giving options and control will help in the overall message. And also cleaning, I shouldn't say cleaning up, but just wordsmithing a little bit what this looks like, I think will really help. We've heard a lot up here, and it is kind of plays with your mind a little bit, the way it's presented, and I don't know how you can present it any differently. But we hear it a lot, but a lot of people in the community probably don't hear it a lot, so they're thinking, oh, my taxes are going up immensely, and it's going to be this amount of money. They're not understanding the nuts and bolts of it. So I think if there is a way to do it, let's try it. If not, then I understand, but thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
So I am in favor of the temporary 12-year. My understanding, or what I'm gleaning, is this 5%, although it might not be linked to CPI, would cover kind of the effects of CPI in the last 6 years. So I'm in favor of that. And then as far as the verbiage, I'm struggling with the EGs because it gives equal weight to police, fire, school safety, probation, and police is the bulk of it. And so rather than say technicians and analysts, community engagement, it seems to me it should be more police and support staff, and that could save us words. And maybe we could, I don't know if there's a way, if we save words, to have people understand. It seems obvious, but I don't think it is, to say if you start at $200, 5% equals this the following year. Because I think if people heard 5%, it's not the same as $5 extra.
Yeah, and I think that this is also part of, aside from just the ballot title, there's room in an explanatory statement and things like that. But I think there's also the continued engagement with the community in terms of educational pieces and things like that, building on the work that's already been done that can help communicate that.
Yeah, and I think school safety is important. I think mental health is important in that description, because those are things that I think the public really looks for. But I guess I'm just thinking technicians, analysts, community engagement, those are really support of police, and they shouldn't be equally weighted with police, because the 80%, or I'm guessing, is really police in the levy. So that's my take. And I have to leave, so I won't be able to vote on the capital bond. So sorry, I have a plane to catch.
Councilmember Zorns.
This has to be done in 6-year blocks, is that right? I mean, we couldn't do it in, I'm just thinking out loud
You have
here.
flexibility. There's a limit on using that inflator, as we've been talking about. That's the maximum of 6 years. But otherwise, you can use any time blocks that you think are interesting to you.
Okay, so I should be able to do math. So I'm thinking Bothell's not going to be totally built out in 5 years. We're not, 6 years. We're not going to know if this is going to meet our needs. 6 years down the road, we probably need about 10 years. And everyone, what they're discussing here, I'm on board with. I like the readability of the 20-30 year. I think that's an easy target for people to just kind of round up and see numbers there, and that's 12 years, right? So, my mind, I'm thinking 10 years, we're going to know if Bothell's going to need to, if this is going to be sufficient, or if we're going to have to come back and revisit this with people to amend what's happening in our public safety, but 2030 is a very readable number, so I guess 10, 12 years is not a big difference. And that's my only input.
All right, you got feedback from everybody. Is that good? Okay.
This one's a little more straightforward. This is just to show you the bond language. So this includes a total, and I believe the estimates we had were this would be an impact of 26 cents per 1,000 AV. This is the 35.1 million from the 2 station replacements that we had showed you earlier. There's much further information on that pre-design work that we had done with some architects and estimators in your packet. So this is simply what the ballot language would look like. The 35.5 is to include cost of issuance. So it's the 35.1 that you've seen plus 1% to pay for the rest of it. And then it has a 20-year maturity, and then I will hand it over to those who knew more. But this one's a little more straightforward because it's the amount of the bond and the duration.
I am trying to find if it's 26 cents. I believe that's what we talked about earlier, but otherwise I'm going to go get my phone and do a calculation real quick while Alice answers your questions, okay?
Sure. Yeah, again, it is straightforward. I think when you're authorizing the bonds, you talk about what the purpose would be. In here, we've talked about constructing, reconstructing, renovating, and equipping 2 fire stations and related capital improvements for those 2. And again, the total amount that would be authorized and the length of time over which the bonds would be amortized. And then this also approves the debt capacity as well as this would be the additional tax, an excess levy for this particular purpose only. So do you have questions about this or how the bonds work? Any of that?
I'm comfortable with this one. I get
Okay.
it. Yeah. Anybody? Questions? Councilmember McNeil?
I have a question. I don't know if it relates to this, but at the end of the 20 years, what happens?
There's no more levy and there's no more debt.
Okay, and then what happens with the fire stations at that point?
They're yours to keep and maintain and operate for as long as you like.
So will we have money in our budget to maintain and do all those special, wonderful things after that 20 years, or will we be right back there again 20 years from now doing another bond?
Well, it's based on the amount, the length of the time of the levy that you're approving, you're already coming up short. So if you're doing a 12-year levy, on the 13th year, we're going to be short monies to maintain these fire stations. So it's something that we're going to need to look at as we plan out our long-range financial obligations.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Olson?
So this Proposition 2 here, so is that the reconstruction of those 2 fire stations? Because just in the language here, it's just kind of has a lot of extra text in there, just construct, reconstruct, renovate. Sounds like it's like the whole package, or where we're just actually doing the full package, but it sounds like, I don't know, it sounds squishy.
Too many verbs.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what it seems like.
That's the lawyers writing things
Yeah.
with too many words that mean the same thing.
If I was-
Yeah, we can look at wordsmithing that.
Yeah, if it was me, I would just say, construct 2 brand new shiny fire stations and go with that. But
Yes, 26 cents per 1,000.
thank you.
We'll look at that. I'll have a slight bias to making sure there's enough wiggle room to make sure you really are covering all the costs that are in there. Because again, as lawyers, we microscopically look at those words. And if you see construct, you might get someone who says, I can't buy the equipment. But we'll make sure it is readable. How's that?
Any other input on the capital levy? Councilmember McAuliffe?
So what we'll be asking the voters for is 43 cents per 1,000 and 26 cents per 1,000. So Tammy, can you put that together for how much it would be for a $500,000 home?
69 cents, I believe, but I can't write.
No, I'm not asking you 69.
The 223?
Let's see, if 213 was 43 and now we have 26, so it's another 100 or so on top of that. So it's maybe $315. That's the lawyer doing math, so.
Thank you. Okay.
333
333.
plus one, okay, so 333. Somebody who does math over there.
333 per
Per 500.
Per year.
For a $500,000 home, a $333 increase
per year.
for, well, not increasing, but yes, that amount would be added on.
Okay.
Yeah, not doubling or multiplying.
Okay. Councilor Agnew?
So it's a 20-year bond. What if we need to build another fire station within this time frame? What do we do?
Well, we can't refund it anymore. You would actually have to go out with another bond measure to add it. I will say that this does coincide with in 2017 in December, we finished paying off the public safety building across the way that was just under 11 cents per thousand. So it is coinciding with that. So taxpayers actually did see a decrease this year for 2018.
Thank you. I was afraid you were going to say that.
All right, any other comments on the capital levy? Did you get what you needed from the council? Great.
I think that was it. So just if you have any further feedback or comments, I thought this was a conversational looking picture, so I can always use more pictures than this. These are people. So just wanted to see if you had any additional feedback or if you would like us to continue development of this and bring it back to you in the form of the draft ordinances.
I'm comfortable with it coming back in the form of draft ordinances. How do you guys feel about that? Are we ready? Tom, you're this public safety guy over there. You're not nodding.
Well, I wanted to add something or change something, if at all possible, on the 13 items. And Chief, you said you wanted to hire 3 firefighters, and that would give us a percentage of an aid car. And how much of an aid car would we have?
Well, based on what we have today, and potentially 2 more firefighters in the budget, not the levy, but the budget, and then combined with the 3 in the levy, we would have probably enough on staff to staff the aid car a large percentage of the time. Without actually declaring a staffed aid car, we would have 2 people on board every day, I would say 70% of the time to staff that aid car.
Okay, so you're saying you wouldn't increase your staffing, you just use the excess staffing to staff that aid car?
Correct. You'd still have a 12 minimum staffing on the books, but we would have enough people on shift every day to cover vacations and whatnot to have 2 people assigned to that aid car.
And if you had 2 additional firefighters, do you think that would give you 100% coverage?
I have actually not looked at that. It would be getting very close, yes.
Okay. And I'd like to take a look at it, and I'd like to take 2 of the swing shift officers off and put firefighters in there. That way we still have our PROACT team, we still have some swing shift officers, we have the other officers that the police wanted, and it would staff up that aid car, which does bring in revenue with the transportation fees that are associated with that. And we definitely need the resources. I mean, their call volume's gone up 25% in the last 5 years. Their staffing hasn't. So I'd ask everybody to take a look at that. Now I'm done.
All right, good. I would need a little more information from the impacts of that to the police department as well, just so we just kind of, but that would be something, I guess, of interest to me for Councilmember Agnew, because he's been such an advocate for fire forever. Just to have that part of the June 17th, we'll just make that part of the decision process. Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? And how do you feel, Councilmember McAuliffe?
So I think that probably getting as much information as we can so that we can move forward with our decision. But I did ask earlier if there could be renovation on one of the fire stations. I'm sorry, what number the one in Canyon Park?
If you had to pick a baby, it was 45 that he would renovate, and 42 he would, no, 45
No,
you'd level,
45.
42 you'd renovate.
Well, if we're going down that road again, the numbers came out on that, looking at that, the 42, the renovation was about $1 million shy of doing the whole thing, so that probably wouldn't make sense, I guess. Does that make?
So I guess my question is, why don't we just give me the numbers as far as like one will be reconstructed, correct? And one would be renovated. Why don't we just look at the differences? And just, if you'll give it to me, so I can see it. That would be helpful.
Okay, anything else that we need to? Nope, good, all right. The air conditioning turned off, so we all need to leave here pretty soon anyway. There was a request for Councilmember McNeil to have a moment of personal privilege here at the end. Is it personal privilege, or what do you want?
Go to the order.
Go to the order.
Go to the order, if that's okay.
You have the floor.
So I attended the AWC Legislative Days, and there was a pretty robust discussion. It's ironic that we're talking about public safety right now around school safety, gun shootings and stuff. And a Hoke William Police Chief was part of the committee that I was in. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that this discussion is happening around how to keep schools themselves safe and keeping kids in classrooms safe. So I just want to make sure that we, the council's aware that that conversation is now taking place, not just putting officers in schools, but how do you lock down schools and how do you message an active shooting versus a fire response. So and I know that our two chiefs have been involved in those conversations, so very happy with that. The other one is a very positive thing. This past weekend, I was able to have an event at the Wayne Golf Course. 130 people attended. The Parks Director, Tracy, was there. Stopped by and see all the wonderful folks, family members. There was toddlers out there, and I had the opportunity to cook 83 hamburgers personally for these folks and about 60 hot dogs. So Wayne Golf Course Park, whatever we decide to call it, the signs were up, so hopefully those people start sending in the names they want to hear. But I just wanted the community to know that that park is getting great use right now. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, it's moved by Councilmember Agnew, seconded by Councilmember McNeil. Place your vote. Passes unanimously with Deputy Mayor absent excused. We are adjourned. Have a good night.